to The Hague now. That's where we find our correspondent, Alex Cadier, who's live to us from just outside the Peace Palace. And Alex, I see some supporters of the Israeli government presumably there. We'll get to that in just a moment. But yesterday, we heard the South African government speaking of apocalyptic scenes where they painted this image of Israel trying to, quite frankly, wipe Gaza off the map. You really get a sense that they're just trying to build on the arguments that they made the last time they were there.
Yeah, that's certainly the sense that we got from South Africa's case yesterday, effectively saying that as the war in Gaza, as Israeli military operations evolve there, so too does this case, narrowing the scope of the provisional measures requested. We know that the last time South Africa requested provisional measures from the court, one of them was the call or the order for a complete ceasefire. Now the demands are much narrower, looking specifically at the operation in Rafah and arguing that creates conditions in which human life cannot be sustained and therefore could lead to the elimination of the Palestinian people in Gaza. That is the legal aspect of this case brought by South Africa, but there is also a political background to this with that operation in Rafah specifically, which is that ultimately if this order were to be given by the International Court of Justice in the Peace Palace behind me, then the enforcement of that order would be down to the UN Security Council, which means crucially the US position on this issue would be vital. They may or may not veto any enforcement, meaning that actually the US position on the operation in Rafah, which we have seen them object to on several occasions, is also vital in this case. So a narrow scope, but could make a difference by South Africa.
Yeah, part of what Advocate Hadila Hassim, for example, said, representing South Africa, is that the court there should make explicit what was implicit in their previous order. And I suppose that's, a very slick way of asking the court to explicitly call for a ceasefire if in fact they can.
Well, it wouldn't be specifically that. It will, the provisional orders when it comes to today and these hearings are just about the operation in Rafah and broader humanitarian and observer access in Gaza more generally. And the court did have an opportunity to explicitly call for a ceasefire when the last provisional measures were requested by South Africa, and it chose not to do so. That position may have changed, but the hearings yesterday and today will not be looking at a broader ceasefire across Gaza. We know that pretty fierce fighting is going on between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters in the north of Gaza. These hearings will not affect that. They will look specifically at the operation in Rafah and humanitarian access across the Gaza Strip. But nevertheless, that could have an impact. Now, as you quite rightly pointed out, we're seeing some protesters here supporting Israel's defense, because today is the second day of these hearings in which the Israeli legal team will mount a defense. We can expect some level of discussing Israel's right to self-defense, pointing out that Hamas battalions are still in the city of Rafah, Hamas battalions that were involved in the atrocities slaughtering Israeli civilians on October 7th. That will be a crux of the argument. You can also expect accusations from the Israeli side against South Africa, accusing them of being selective in the information they presented to the court, particularly when it comes to humanitarian access. We know that the Israeli operation in Rafah has stopped humanitarian access coming through the Rafah crossing to Egypt, but Hamas rockets have also stopped humanitarian aid coming through the Kerem Shalom crossing to Israel. So there is a fog of war to cut through, and that's what we can expect the court to do in the coming days.
Yeah, I mean, the last time South Africa also being accused of being the mouthpiece of Hamas. Israel also, outside of its self-defense argument, speaking about the issues of jurisdiction, whether or not the ICJ, as a court that usually adjudicates over disputes between nations, is the right place to go to try and sort this issue out.
Yeah, certainly that was one of the early arguments. I think you can, based on the fact that Israel has once again sent a delegation from Tel Aviv coming to The Hague to represent Israel's legal interests, to defend Israel's position, shows a level of engagement that Israel is taking this quite seriously. Senior lawyers being flown out to represent Israel. That jurisdiction argument seems for now to have gone away. We know, for example, that in another court here in The Hague, at the International Criminal Court, they are looking very closely at possible arrest warrants for senior individual Israeli leaders. That would be a different case, and in that the jurisdiction is certainly rejected by Israel. But when it comes to the cases here at the ICJ, at the International Court of Justice behind me, Israel is engaging, of course rejecting all the allegations, repeatedly saying that Israel complies with international law. One thing I would add that's happened in the last few days, Egypt saying it will now consider joining South Africa's case, a very serious development because Egypt is such a crucial regional player, of course, on the other side of the Rafah crossing, joining this case and saying that the Rafah operation threatens peace in the region. So clearly, that international pressure on Israel is mounting.